My mother-in-law told my husband to leave me at the hospital after I gave birth. She didn't expect him to hear everything. I always imagined that the day my daughter was born would become the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day I learned exactly how much my mother-in-law hated me. Not through rumors, not through passive-aggressive comments, not even through the years she spent pretending I would never be good enough for her son. I learned the truth while lying in a hospital bed, barely able to keep my eyes open after 20 hours of labor. She believed my husband had already left the room. She believed I was asleep. Most importantly, she believed no one else could hear her. She was wrong. The one person she never expected to be standing just outside the door heard every single word, and those words destroyed her family forever. My name is Emily. I was 29 years old when my daughter Lily came into the world. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs years earlier. My relationship with my husband's mother had never been warm. She had tolerated me, nothing more. The first time Daniel introduced me to her, she smiled politely, complimented my dress, and spent the rest of dinner asking questions that sounded innocent until I thought about them later. Where did my parents live? How much did they earn? Did I plan to continue working after marriage? Did I know how to cook traditional family recipes? Every question carried the same hidden message. Was I good enough? I answered honestly because I believed she simply wanted to know me. I was wrong. She wasn't learning about me. She was evaluating me. Months later, after Daniel proposed, she became noticeably colder. She never objected openly. She never raised her voice. Instead, she mastered something far more damaging. Small comments, tiny suggestions, constant comparisons. Whenever Daniel wasn't around, she somehow found a way to remind me that his former girlfriend had been such a lovely young woman. Family dinners often included stories about women who sacrificed everything for their husbands. Whenever I received a promotion at work, she asked whether I was becoming too focused on my career. When Daniel proudly told her we planned to buy a house together, she wondered aloud whether it was wise for a young couple to take on so much financial responsibility. Every criticism arrived wrapped inside concern. Every insult arrived disguised as advice. That made defending myself almost impossible. If I reacted, I looked overly sensitive. If I stayed silent, she interpreted it as permission to continue. Daniel noticed some of it, not all of it. Children rarely see their parents the way outsiders do, especially when manipulation has been disguised as love for decades. Whenever I quietly mentioned something that bothered me, Daniel usually smiled and assured me his mother didn't mean any harm. That was the explanation everyone seemed comfortable accepting. She didn't mean it. Maybe she didn't. But intentions mattered very little when the result was always the same. By the time we celebrated our third wedding anniversary, I had learned an important survival skill: distance. I remained polite, respectful, friendly when necessary, but I stopped searching for approval I knew would never come. Oddly enough, that seemed to bother her even more. She could no longer upset me as easily, so she looked for other ways to stay involved in our lives. When I became pregnant, I genuinely hoped everything would change. Grandchildren have a way of softening people. At least, that's what everyone kept telling me. For a few weeks, it almost seemed true. She called more often, asked about doctor's appointments, knitted tiny baby blankets, bought children's books. She even surprised me with homemade soup during my second trimester. For the first time since meeting her, I allowed myself to believe we were finally becoming family. I wanted to believe it. Pregnancy has a way of making people hopeful. You imagine fresh beginnings, new relationships, old wounds healing. I ignored the occasional comment that still slipped through. She questioned every decision. She preferred different baby names, different doctors, different parenting books, different nursery colors. I convinced myself those disagreements were normal. Every grandmother had opinions. Every new mother eventually learned to smile politely and move on. Around my 7th month, however, something changed. The closer I came to giving birth, the more possessive she became. She stopped referring to Lily as your baby. Instead, she called her our little girl. She started decorating a nursery in her own house without asking us. She purchased a crib, a stroller, a car seat, enough baby clothes to fill an entire closet. When I gently suggested that Lily would be living with Daniel and me, not with her, she laughed as though I had told an adorable joke. That laugh stayed with me, because it wasn't embarrassment, it wasn't excitement, it sounded like certainty. At the time, I couldn't explain why it unsettled me. Months later, I finally understood. The final weeks of my pregnancy were far more exhausting emotionally than they were physically. My doctor assured me that Lily was healthy. Daniel attended every appointment he could. Our nursery was finally finished. Everything that truly mattered seemed to be falling into place. Yet, every time my phone rang and my mother-in-law's name appeared on the screen, a knot formed in my stomach. She wanted updates constantly. Not because she asked how I was feeling, she rarely did. Instead, every conversation revolved around the baby. Had we packed the hospital bag? Who would be allowed in the delivery room? How long would the baby stay at the hospital? Had we considered letting her stay with us for the first few weeks? She spoke as though she had already assigned herself a permanent role in our home. Whenever I politely explained that Daniel and I wanted a little time alone to adjust as new parents, she sounded disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed enough to make me feel guilty. I later realized that guilt was one of her favorite tools. She rarely demanded anything directly. She simply made other people feel selfish for saying no. Daniel remained optimistic. He believed his mother was simply excited. He reminded me that she had waited years to become a grandmother. He encouraged me to be patient. I tried, for his sake more than hers. Then everything changed 3 weeks before my due date. Daniel came home from work carrying an envelope. Inside was an offer from another company. It was a promotion, better salary, better benefits, a leadership position he had been working toward for nearly 5 years. I had never seen him smile so much. We celebrated with takeout from our favorite little Italian restaurant and spent the evening talking about the future. A larger home, college savings for Lily, family vacations. For the first time since becoming pregnant, our future felt exciting instead of uncertain. Naturally, Daniel called his mother to share the news. I watched his excitement slowly fade during that conversation. Her spent most of the call listening instead of speaking. When he finally hung up, he looked confused. His mother had congratulated him. Then she had immediately suggested that I should quit my job permanently after the baby arrived. Not because we needed to, because she believed mothers belonged at home. Daniel reminded her that we had already discussed this months earlier. I enjoyed my career. My employer offered generous maternity leave. No, financially, there was no reason for me to resign. She refused to let the subject go. According to her, a child needed her mother every hour of every day. Daycare was irresponsible. Working mothers were selfish. Successful marriages required traditional roles. Daniel ended the conversation before it turned into an argument. That night, he apologized to me even though he had done nothing wrong. I told him it wasn't his fault. Still, I noticed something. For the first time since we married, he looked disappointed in his mother. Not defensive, not dismissive, disappointed. It was a subtle change, but an important one. The following week, she began calling him instead of me, almost every evening. Sometimes the conversations lasted an hour. Whenever I entered the room, the topic mysteriously changed. At first, I ignored it. Everyone deserves private conversations with family. Then, one evening, Daniel accidentally left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking out the trash. His mother called again. The screen lit up with a preview of her voicemail transcription. Only the first sentence appeared before the text was cut off. Remember, once the baby comes, Emily won't be thinking clearly. I stared at the screen. I wasn't trying to invade anyone's privacy. The words were impossible to miss. Daniel came back inside before I could think any further. I told him what I had seen. He listened to the voicemail immediately. The rest of the message was ordinary. His mother talked about baby clothes, hospital parking, and reminding him to eat while I was in labor. Nothing alarming. Nothing that explained the strange first sentence. Daniel assumed she had simply meant I would be exhausted after giving birth. I wanted to believe that explanation, so I let it go. Labor began on a rainy Thursday morning. At first, the contractions were manageable. By lunchtime, they were 5 minutes apart. By evening, they were nearly unbearable. Daniel never left my side. He held my hand through every contraction. He spoke calmly whenever I felt overwhelmed. He reminded me to breathe when I forgot. 21 hours later, our daughter finally arrived. The moment they placed Lily in my arms, the rest of the world disappeared. The pain, the exhaustion, the fear, everything faded beneath the weight of a tiny little girl wrapped in a hospital blanket. She opened her eyes for only a second. That second changed my life forever. I had never understood how parents could say they would do anything for their children. Now I understood completely. After what felt like only a few minutes, the nurses needed to perform routine examinations. Daniel carried Lily beside them while I remained in bed recovering. I barely had enough energy to keep my eyes open. A nurse adjusted my blanket and encouraged me to rest. Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving with our daughter. The room became quiet. I drifted somewhere between sleeping and waking. Voices echoed faintly in the hallway. Footsteps came and went. Time lost all meaning. Then the door opened again. I assumed it was Daniel returning. It wasn't. It was my mother-in-law. She walked inside, believing we were alone. She looked at me for several long seconds. Her expression wasn't joyful. It wasn't emotional. It was thoughtful. Almost calculating. She slowly pulled a chair beside my hospital bed and sat down. I kept my eyes closed. I was too exhausted to move. She mistook my silence for sleep. Then, she began saying things that no grandmother should ever say about the mother of her grandchild. She sat quietly for several seconds before speaking. Her voice was calm. Too calm. There was no excitement about becoming a grandmother, no warmth, no affection. It sounded like someone discussing a business decision that had already been made. She said that some women simply weren't meant to be mothers. She said motherhood required sacrifice, patience, and maturity. Then she quietly listed every reason she believed I lacked those qualities. According to her, I cared too much about my career. I had never fully embraced being part of her family. I was too independent, too opinionated, too determined to make my own decisions. None of those things sounded like flaws to me. To her, they were evidence that I would eventually fail. She continued talking as though she were thinking out loud. She said babies deserved stability. They deserved experienced hands. They deserved to grow up surrounded by people who truly understood family values. Then her voice dropped even lower. She said that the first few weeks after childbirth were confusing for many women. She mentioned postpartum depression, hormonal changes, emotional instability. She spoke about those very real medical conditions as though they were opportunities. Listening from the hospital bed, I felt a chill run through my body. I still couldn't move. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. Some instinct told me that if she believed I was asleep, she would continue revealing what she actually thought. And she did. She calmly explained that Daniel had always struggled to make difficult decisions, even as a child. Whenever he faced conflict, he searched for someone else to guide him. She sounded almost proud of that, as if she had spent decades making sure her son never learned to trust his own judgment. Then she said something I will never forget. She said that once Daniel saw how overwhelmed I became with a newborn, he would realize he had married the wrong woman. She believed exhaustion would open his eyes. She believed fear would make him listen to her. She believed she already knew exactly what advice she would give him. She leaned closer to the bed. Then, in the same calm voice she had been using all along, she said he should take the baby and leave me at the hospital. She insisted it would be easier for everyone if the separation happened immediately. According to her, I would recover faster without the stress of trying to be a wife and mother at the same time. She even suggested that she would gladly help Daniel raise Lily until he found someone more suitable. Every word felt colder than the last. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. I wanted to believe the medication was affecting my hearing. No mother-in-law could possibly say something so cruel only minutes after her granddaughter had been born. But she wasn't finished. She began imagining the future she wanted. Daniel would move back into the family home temporarily. She would care for Lily during the day. Eventually, he would meet a woman who understood traditional family values, someone who appreciated staying home, someone who respected her advice, someone who wouldn't challenge every opinion she offered. In her mind, she wasn't destroying a family, she was fixing a mistake. Tears slowly rolled down my face, not because I was weak, because I had never felt so completely dehumanized. To her, I wasn't a person lying in recovery after a difficult labor. I was an obstacle, a problem to remove, a chapter she wanted erased. Before standing. For a moment, I thought she was finally leaving. Instead, she walked toward the bassinet where Lily would soon be placed after the nurses finished their examinations. She rested one hand on the empty plastic crib and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on her face since entering the room. She whispered that everything would be better soon, that she would make sure her granddaughter had the family she deserved. At that exact moment, another voice spoke from the doorway. Not loud, not angry, just one quiet sentence. I heard every word. The smile disappeared from her face instantly. She turned so quickly that the chair beside her nearly tipped over. Daniel stood in the doorway, still wearing the blue hospital wristband they had given him in the delivery room. Lily was sleeping peacefully in his arms. A nurse stood several feet behind him. The expression on his face wasn't shock. Shock lasts only a moment. This was something much worse. It was the look of a son realizing that the person he had trusted his entire life wasn't the person he thought she was. Neither of them spoke. The silence inside that hospital room felt almost unbearable. His mother opened her mouth several times, searching for an explanation. Nothing came, because there was nothing to explain. She hadn't been misunderstood. She hadn't misspoken. She had simply assumed no one else was listening. Daniel slowly walked toward my bed without taking his eyes off her. He gently placed Lily into my arms. Then he pulled my blanket higher around my shoulders. Only after making sure both his wife and daughter were comfortable did he finally look back at his mother. For the first time since I had known him, there wasn't a trace of doubt in his eyes, only disappointment. And something else, a quiet certainty that nothing between them would ever be the same again. Daniel didn't raise his voice. That was what frightened his mother the most. She had spent years navigating arguments by becoming louder than everyone else. She interrupted, redirected conversations, and convinced people they had misunderstood her intentions. None of those tactics worked against silence. Daniel simply stood there looking at her. His expression was unlike anything I had ever seen. Not anger, not confusion. It looked more like grief. The kind of grief that comes from realizing someone you love never truly existed the way you believed. His mother finally began speaking. The words came quickly, stumbling over one another as she desperately searched for an explanation. She insisted I had misunderstood. She claimed she had only been worried about my health. She said postpartum recovery could be difficult, and she wanted to make sure Daniel had support. Every sentence sounded weaker than the one before, not because she wasn't convincing, because Daniel had heard everything before she realized he was standing there. There was nothing left to reinterpret. He had heard every word exactly as she intended it. He quietly asked the nurse to give us a few minutes. The nurse looked at all three of us before gently closing the door. The room became painfully still. Daniel looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms. She had no idea that less than an hour after entering the world, someone had already tried to separate her from her mother. He slowly turned back toward his mother. For years, she had always known exactly what to say to him. This time, she couldn't even meet his eyes. She kept apologizing, not for what she had said, for being misunderstood. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. She never once apologized for wanting to destroy our family. She only apologized because someone else had heard it. That difference changed everything. Without raising his voice, he told her to leave. She didn't move. Instead, she tried one last time to convince him that stress had made her choose the wrong words. She reminded him that she had always wanted the best for him. She reminded him that she loved him. She reminded him that she was his mother. Daniel listened patiently. Then he quietly answered with words I still remember years later. He said that love should never require destroying someone else. After that, he opened the hospital room door. His mother stood frozen for several seconds. She looked toward me as if expecting me to intervene. Perhaps she believed I would encourage reconciliation. Instead, I simply held Lily a little closer. For the first time since meeting her, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, no fear, only relief. The mask had finally fallen. She slowly walked into the hallway. Daniel closed the door behind her. Then he locked it. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. We simply sat together in complete silence while Lily slept peacefully between us. Eventually, Daniel pulled a chair beside my bed. He looked exhausted, not from the long labor, from everything he had just learned. He admitted there had been moments over the years when I had tried to explain his mother's behavior. He remembered defending her, making excuses, telling me she meant well. Looking back, he realized he hadn't been protecting his mother. He had been protecting the image of the mother he wanted to believe existed. Those were two very different people. He apologized, not because he had said cruel things himself, because every time he dismissed my concerns, he had unknowingly left me to face them alone. I reached for his hand. There was nothing else either of us needed to say. The truth had finally reached him. No argument could have accomplished what those few minutes outside the hospital room had done. The following morning, the phone calls began. His mother called first, then again, then again. By lunchtime, she had left more than a dozen voicemails. Some were emotional, some were angry, some insisted she deserved another chance. Daniel listened to exactly one of them before deleting the rest. Later that afternoon, his father arrived alone. He looked embarrassed before he even entered the room. It turned out he had no idea what his wife intended to say at the hospital. He had remained at home while she came to visit us. After hearing what had happened from Daniel, he looked 20 years older. He apologized repeatedly, not on her behalf, on his own. He admitted that over the years he had often stayed quiet whenever his wife criticized people. Avoiding conflict had always seemed easier. Now he realized that silence had allowed something much worse to grow. Before leaving, he looked at his granddaughter sleeping peacefully in the bassinet, his eyes filled with tears. He quietly promised that no one would ever come between Lily and her parents again. It was the first promise from that side of the family that I actually believed. 3 days later, we brought Lily home. The nursery we had spent months preparing finally welcomed its tiny owner. Friends visited, neighbors dropped off meals, co-workers sent flowers. One person was noticeably absent, my mother-in-law. Not because she chose to stay away, because Daniel had made it clear that our home was no longer open to anyone who viewed our family as something to dismantle instead of protect. For the first time since we married, he wasn't choosing between his wife and his mother. He was choosing the family he had vowed to build. And despite everything that had happened, that decision marked the true beginning of our life together. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming matches on our front lawn, no relatives showing up uninvited to force a reconciliation. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that settles over a family after everyone realizes a line has finally been crossed. For the first 2 weeks, Daniel blocked every call from his mother. She switched to emails, then letters, then messages sent through relatives. Every one of them carried the same theme. She missed her granddaughter. She wanted another chance. She loved her family. None of them mentioned what she had actually said in the hospital. It was as though those words had never existed. And eventually, one of Daniel's cousins called to ask what had happened. Apparently, his mother had already begun telling people that I had manipulated Daniel into cutting her out of our lives. According to her version of events, I was suffering from postpartum hormones and had misunderstood an innocent conversation. She claimed I had exaggerated everything. Normally, I would have been terrified by that kind of rumor. This time, I wasn't. Because for the first time, I wasn't standing alone. Daniel calmly told every relative exactly what he had heard with his own ears. He didn't add details. He didn't exaggerate. He simply repeated her words exactly as she had spoken them. The conversations became very short after that. Truth has a remarkable way of ending arguments. About a month later, his father invited Daniel to lunch. He came home unusually quiet. When I asked how it went, he admitted something that surprised even him. His father had confessed this wasn't the first time his mother had tried to interfere in one of Daniel's relationships. Back in college, Daniel had dated a woman for almost 2 years before meeting me. The relationship had ended suddenly. At the time, Daniel believed they had simply grown apart. His father finally admitted that wasn't the whole story. Without telling anyone, his mother had spent months contacting the young woman behind Daniel's back. She criticized their relationship, questioned her intentions, suggested Daniel deserved someone better suited to their family. Eventually, the relationship collapsed under the constant pressure. Daniel had never known. His father had, and he had stayed silent. Listening to that story explained something that had confused me for years. I had always wondered why his mother seemed so confident she could influence every important decision in his life. Now I understood. Because it had worked before. She genuinely believed she could control the outcome again. The difference this time was that she had finally said the quiet part out loud. As Lily grew, our lives slowly found a rhythm. Sleepless nights became sleepy mornings. Tiny newborn clothes became little dresses and shoes. The nursery walls filled with photographs documenting every milestone. First smile, first laugh, first steps. Every picture reminded me of something important. She was growing up surrounded by peace, not manipulation, not favoritism. Peace. One evening, when Lily was almost 6 months old, Daniel walked into the living room carrying a cardboard box. It had been sitting in his parents' attic for years. His father had quietly dropped it off while his mother was visiting one of her sisters. Inside were old photo albums, school certificates, birthday cards, and dozens of home videos from Daniel's childhood. We spent hours looking through them. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Then, certain patterns began appearing. Every achievement belonged to Daniel. Every birthday revolved around him. Every family vacation centered on what he wanted to do. When photographs included his cousins, his mother somehow positioned Daniel in the middle of every picture. She wasn't just proud. She had built an entire world where her son remained the center of everyone's attention. Then we found something neither of us expected: a faded notebook tucked inside one of the albums. It belonged to Daniel's father. Most of the pages contained household budgets and repair estimates. Near the back, however, were handwritten journal entries spanning several years. One entry caught Daniel's attention immediately. It had been written shortly after our wedding. His father described feeling worried that his wife viewed me as competition instead of family. Another entry mentioned arguments about future grandchildren. His mother had apparently insisted long before I was ever pregnant that no woman would ever raise her grandchildren correctly. The final sentence on that page left both of us speechless. His father had written, "One day, she's going to push Daniel too far. I just hope he sees it before she destroys his marriage." He had predicted everything, years before it happened, but fear had kept him silent. Daniel closed the notebook and stared at the wall for a long time. Finally, he looked at me and quietly admitted something. He said the hardest part wasn't discovering who his mother really was. The hardest part was realizing how many people had seen it coming, and how few had been willing to stop her. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel made one final decision. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and typed a short email. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It simply explained that until his mother accepted full responsibility for what she had said, and sought professional help to understand why she believed separating a newborn from her mother was acceptable, there would be no relationship. Not with him. Not with me. And certainly not with Lily. He pressed send. Then he closed the laptop. Neither of us knew whether she would ever change, but for the first time since becoming parents, we stopped worrying about protecting ourselves. Our only responsibility now was protecting the little girl sleeping peacefully down the hall. And unlike the generation before us, we intended to keep that promise. The email remained unanswered for almost 3 weeks. No apology arrived, no acknowledgement, no acceptance of responsibility. Instead, life became wonderfully ordinary, and after everything we had been through, ordinary felt like a luxury. Daniel settled into his new role as a father with the same quiet determination he brought to everything else in life. He learned how to change diapers faster than I could. He mastered the impossible art of rocking Lily back to sleep at 3 in the morning without fully waking himself up. Every evening, he rushed home from work just to spend an extra hour with her before bedtime. Watching him with our daughter erased something inside me that I hadn't realized I was still carrying: fear. For months, I had worried that his mother's influence had shaped him more deeply than either of us understood. Instead, becoming a father revealed the man he had always been beneath years of manipulation. He wasn't becoming someone new. He was finally becoming himself. About a month later, his father asked if he could visit. He came alone. Again. This time, he carried several storage boxes. He explained that he had spent weeks cleaning the basement and attic. As he sorted through decades of family belongings, he kept finding things that belonged to Daniel. School trophies, childhood drawings, old report cards, letters. He wanted them to be in our home instead. While unpacking one of the boxes, an old envelope slipped onto the living room floor. It had never been opened. Daniel picked it up, confused. His name was written across the front in handwriting neither of us recognized. The envelope had been postmarked almost 12 years earlier. Curious, he carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from his former college girlfriend, the woman his mother had quietly driven away years before. She explained that she had ended their relationship because someone claiming to speak on behalf of Daniel's family had repeatedly contacted her. The woman warned her that she would never be accepted, that she would never be good enough, that marrying Daniel would only make everyone's lives miserable. At first, she believed those messages reflected Daniel's own feelings. Only later did she discover they came from his mother. By then, too much damage had already been done. She apologized for leaving without telling him the truth. She admitted she had mailed the letter, hoping he would finally understand what had happened. But the letter had never reached him. Someone had intercepted it. Neither of us needed to guess who. Daniel folded the letter very slowly. His father lowered his head. He admitted he had always suspected his wife had hidden it. He simply never had proof. Now the proof sat in Daniel's hands. That discovery answered questions he had carried for more than a decade. It also erased the final excuse he had continued making for his mother's behavior. This wasn't a single terrible mistake. It was a lifelong pattern. She hadn't suddenly become controlling after Lily was born. She had always believed she had the right to choose who belonged in her son's life. This time, she had simply gone too far. A few days later, another email finally arrived. It was from his mother. It stretched across several pages. She described her own difficult childhood, her fears, her loneliness, her love for Daniel. She insisted everything she had ever done came from wanting the best for him. As I read it, something felt strangely familiar. The letter contained thousands of words, yet nowhere did she write the 2 words that actually mattered. "I'm sorry," she explained. She defended, she justified. She blamed stress, she blamed emotion, she blamed misunderstanding. She blamed everyone except herself. Daniel finished reading before quietly closing his laptop. He didn't respond. Neither did I. Sometimes silence communicates more clearly than another argument ever could. Months turned into years. Lily started preschool, then kindergarten, then elementary school. She grew into the happiest little girl I had ever known, confident, kind, curious about everything. She never doubted that her parents loved her. She never questioned whether she belonged. Every night before bed, Daniel read to her while I listened from the hallway. Every birthday ended with family photographs where no child stood in the background. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated. Not because trophies mattered, because children remember who showed up. One Saturday afternoon, when Lily was almost 8, she asked a question that stopped both of us. She wondered why she didn't have a grandma like some of her friends. Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. We had known this conversation would eventually come. We simply hadn't known when. We told her the truth in the gentlest way we could. Some adults make choices that hurt the people they love. Sometimes those adults aren't safe to have close relationships with. Loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to continue causing harm. Lily listened carefully. Then she nodded with the simple wisdom only children sometimes possess. She smiled and said she already had enough people who loved her. She mentioned Grandpa, my parents, our neighbors, her teachers, our closest friends. Then she hugged us both before running back outside to play. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, yet it confirmed something I had hoped for since the day she was born. The cycle had finally ended. She wasn't growing up surrounded by fear. She was growing up surrounded by security. Looking back now, people often ask when my marriage became truly unbreakable. They assume it happened on our wedding day, or when Lily was born. They're wrong. It happened in a quiet hospital hallway. The moment my husband chose to believe what he heard with his own ears instead of what someone else wanted him to believe. That single decision saved our family. Because loyalty isn't proven by blindly defending the people who raised you. It's proven by protecting the family you choose to build. And every time I watch Daniel laughing with our daughter in the backyard, I'm grateful his mother made one terrible mistake. She thought no one was listening. She never realized that the person standing outside the door wasn't just hearing her words, he was hearing the truth. And once the truth is heard, some relationships can never return to what they were before. Years have passed since that day. Lily is no longer the tiny newborn I held in a hospital bed while wondering whether my world was falling apart. She's a confident, compassionate teenager who laughs loudly, speaks her mind, and never questions whether she is loved. That, more than anything else, tells me we made the right decisions. Children don't remember every birthday gift. They don't remember every vacation, but they always remember how safe they felt growing up. Our home became the exact opposite of the one Daniel had been raised in. There were no favorites, no manipulation disguised as concern, no love that had to be earned. Only honesty, only respect, only the quiet certainty that every member of the family mattered equally. Daniel's relationship with his father slowly healed over the years. His father never tried to excuse the past again. Instead, he accepted responsibility for remaining silent for so long. He became the grandfather Lily deserved. He attended every school play, every piano recital, every birthday party. He never tried to replace the years that had been lost. He simply made sure he never wasted another one. His mother made a different choice. She refused counseling. She refused accountability. She refused to admit that her own actions had destroyed the relationship with her son. Instead, she spent years telling anyone who would listen that she had been unfairly cut out of her granddaughter's life. Some people believed her. Most didn't, because the truth has a way of revealing itself over time. Eventually, even relatives who once defended her began distancing themselves after experiencing the same controlling behavior for themselves. The family she fought so hard to control slowly stopped inviting her into their lives, not because anyone organized against her, because trust, once broken enough times, eventually disappears on its own. Nearly 15 years after Lily was born, Daniel received another phone call. This one came from a hospital. His mother had suffered a serious stroke. She survived, but recovery would be long. The doctors explained she would need ongoing care and rehabilitation. Several relatives assumed Daniel would immediately step in. After all, he was her only child. Instead, he quietly asked the hospital social worker a single question. What resources are available for patients who don't have family caregivers? He made sure she would receive proper medical care. He made sure every bill was paid. He made sure she would never be abandoned. But he never promised to rebuild a relationship that she herself had destroyed. Some people called him cold. I never did. There is a difference between revenge and boundaries. Revenge seeks to make someone suffer. Boundaries simply refuse to suffer any longer. Daniel wasn't punishing his mother. He was protecting the family we had spent years building. One autumn afternoon, Lily asked if she could interview us for a school project about defining moments in people's lives. She interviewed neighbors, teachers, friends. Then she sat across from us at the kitchen table with a notebook in her hands. Her final question caught both of us off guard. She asked what the most important decision we had ever made was. I smiled and looked at Daniel. He smiled back. Neither of us needed time to think. My answer was marrying the man who chose truth over comfort. His answer was much simpler. He said the most important decision of his life wasn't accepting a promotion, buying our first home, or becoming a father. It was deciding that the family he created would always come before the family that raised him. Lily wrote those words down without fully understanding how much history they carried. One day, she probably will. When she left the room, Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. The silence between us felt completely different from the silence in that hospital room years earlier. That silence had been filled with betrayal. This one was filled with peace. Sometimes people ask whether I regret everything that happened, whether I wish my mother-in-law had accepted me from the beginning, whether life would have been easier if she had simply loved me. Of course it would have. But then I remember something. If she had never revealed who she truly was, Daniel might have spent the rest of his life believing manipulation was love. Our daughter might have grown up watching the same unhealthy patterns repeat themselves. Instead, one terrible afternoon exposed the truth before it could shape another generation. In the end, my mother-in-law lost exactly what she spent years trying to control. Not because anyone took it from her, because she sacrificed it herself. She wanted a son who obeyed her. Instead, she raised a man strong enough to walk away. She wanted a granddaughter she could influence. Instead, she created parents determined to protect their child from becoming her next victim. And I often think back to that hospital room. She believed I was asleep. She believed Daniel couldn't hear her. She believed those few quiet words would remain a secret forever. She was wrong, because sometimes, the moment someone thinks no one is listening is the exact moment they reveal who they really are. And that truth became the greatest gift she ever gave our family.